The semantic property of verbs can be defined in at least two different ways. The first method is a role-centered approach, which describes the verbs in terms of the arguments they take, and the second focuses on the aspectual class of the verb or the verb phrase, that is, in terms of the time course of the event the verb describes. We shall explore both these approaches in this unit, and as an indicator of how important the aspectual class information is, we will look at Meiteilon directional affixes. Traditional grammatical descriptions usually describe verbs on the basis of the notion of transitivity, a number of arguments that a verbal predicate might take. Verbs can be intransitive or monotransitive, taking only one argument, transitive 2 arguments, and ditransitive 3 arguments. However, this approach is not very informative as far as getting at the meanings of the verbs is concerned, because even as a large number of verbs may be transitive, the semantic roles each verb assigns to its second argument may differ considerably. As the work of Bert Levin has shown, the direct object, the bridge, in the following sentences has a different semantic role based on the verb that selects it. So, the engineer destroyed the bridge. The bridge is a consumed object or a patient. In the engineer widened the bridge is just a patient. In the engineer moved the bridge is a theme. In the engineer washed the bridge, it's a location or a surface. The engineer crossed the bridge, it's a location. The engineer reached the bridge is a goal. The engineer left the bridge is a source. The engineer hated the bridge is a stimulus. These semantic roles determined by predicate are largely unaffected by the denotation of the noun phrase that is in direct object position. In all cases, there is a reference to a world out there. In other words, if the direct object was changed to a cat or John, the semantic roles assigned would not be affected. For example, in the sentence, the engineer reached John or the engineer reached the bridge, the semantic property of the verb reach would require us to focus on the location represented by John or the bridge as the goal of the motion verb reach. However, in the engineer hated John, just like in the engineer hated the bridge, both noun phrases would be interpreted as the stimulus for the emotion of hate in the engineer. A number of semantic roles have been identified as systematically being assigned by the verb, or predicates in general, in fact, since Fillmore 1968. Semantic roles classify arguments of predicate into a set of participant types and provide us with the means of describing the semantic relation between the arguments of the verb and the situation described by the verb. Some of the most frequently cited and widely assumed semantic role labels include agent, who is the participant that initiates the action and is capable of acting with volition. So, as an example, Ram cooked the meat. Patient, an entity that undergoes the effect of some action, often leading to a change of state. The sun melted the ice, where the ice is a patient. Theme, the entity which is moved by an action, as in the book is in the library, or even whose location is being described. Experiencer, the entity which is aware of the action or state described by the predicate but which is not in control of it, such as in Ram saw the snake, where Ram is the experiencer. Beneficiary is the semantic role that represents the entity for whose benefit the action was performed, as in Ram filled the form for her, where her is the beneficiary. Goal is the entity towards which something moves, as in Ram gave the gun to Sita, where Sita is the goal. Source, the entity from which something moves. This the plane came from Delhi, where Delhi is the source. Force, the natural cause that causes an action. So an avalanche destroyed the car. An avalanche has the force theta semantic role. In Ram saw the snake yesterday, the location, the semantic role of time, right, at which the action occurs. And location, of course, denotes the place where the action occurs, as in the book is in the house, with the house serving as location. In recent years, however, while the importance of semantic roles has never completely been negated in theorizing about the semantic features of predicates in general and verbal predicates in particular, research has also seen very little consensus on the total number or set of roles that must be postulated. There is also a pressing lack of reliable diagnostic for isolating semantic roles in a language-independent manner, and also considerable disagreement about what particular role is assigned in to specific examples. For example, in the sentence, I bought Sam a car, there is no reliable way, and therefore no agreement, to choose whether Sam receives the beneficiary or the goal semantic role. Role-based typologies of the semantic features of verbs continue to be important descriptively, as they enable us to make generalizations about the expression of verbal argument structure. For example, one generalization that can be made is in the active voice, the semantic role of agent, if present, maps onto the grammatical function of subject, as in Ram pushed the ball. Another generalization is one that if a verbal predicate assigns three semantic roles, then the expressed semantic role of theme is necessarily one of the assigned. Focusing now on what role-based typologies contribute to our understanding of verb meaning, we find that while such classification is necessary, it is not sufficient to describe all the semantic properties of verb. Think of it like this. A verb can be thought of as a script for a scene and the arguments as the actors. Semantic roles specify the role that each character plays in the script. But this information is not enough in itself to describe what the scene is in its entirety. Just as a scene involves time, duration, and props, a proper description of verb meaning requires attention to the internal temporal structure of the event the verb describes. This leads us to aspectual approaches to the semantic features of verb. These approaches take the basic premise that since verbs denote events in time, they can be differentiated along how the events they denote unfold in time. This eventuality-related aspect is known in the literature as Aktionsart, or situation, or inner, or lexical aspect. This has a long tradition of discussion since Wendler 1967. Verbs have been considered to belong to five major classes: states, or activities, or accomplishments, or achievements, or semi-factor. Let us define these as follows. States take some stretch of time for every period in which the states hold true. They do not involve any change of state as an inherent part of meaning. This is in contrast to events which involve change of state, such as run, sleep, sweep, break, knock, hate, etc. States like hate, know, believe, be angry are continuous. Activities are non-stative verbs that describe events that consume time but have no end point for the event built into them. So clean, pour, run, stroll, these have, in linguistic semantics terms, no specification as when they will end. Because in principle an activity can go on without end, And while real world limitations do bring these events to a close, there's nothing in the verb's meaning that requires the activity to end. Accomplishments, on the other hand, also describe events that consume time, but they are unlike activities, as they clearly have an endpoint. For example, the event of building a house is over once the house is constructed. While walking, I walk has no end point in built to the meaning of walk. In I walked to the park, the event finishes as once I have reached the park. Achievements are also events that consume time, but they don't have an end point. However, the moment described by the verb is the moment the result state is achieved. For example, break and arrive. These verbs usually presuppose rather than describe an accompanying process building up to the result state. 7th actives are events that take no more than a moment in time. And like activities, no result states follows. What are the diagnostics for aspectual classification? First, let us attempt to distinguish statives from non-statives. Only non-statives can be found in the progressive aspect. So you can't say for a stative, I am knowing the answer. But a word of caution is also necessary. The lack of a progressive does not necessarily indicate stativity, as some achievements are also incompatible with the progressive. For example, she was missing the bus. Finally, when the progressive occurs with semifactives, it gives an iterated event reading. When you say he is sneezing, what is interpreted is a multiple occurrence of sneezing events in the present time span. Only non-statives can occur as imperatives. Furthermore, only non-statives can occur with agent-oriented adverbs like deliberately or carefully. So, for example, she knows the answer carefully is unacceptable. These adverbs are also at odds with achievement predicates. In Kerry deliberately won the lottery. Only non-statives can act as complements of force or persuade. The teacher forced her to know the answer is unacceptable. Only non-statives can occur in the pseudo-clef construction in English. What Sally did was know the answer. In statives, the simple present refers to the present, but has an habitual interpretation in the non-stative. For example, in the stative, I know the answer, simple present morphology indicates a present reference. But in the non-stative I run, the only interpretation is a habitual one. What about distinguishing amongst events? There are a number of tests that distinguish events from non-stative. In your lesson, there is an exhaustive list of these tests, most notable amongst which is the notion of the use of the adverbial for an hour and in an hour. Let us illustrate this with the verb read. First of all, we know that the verb read cannot be a stative. This verb read can, in the simple present tense, indicates a habitual reference. He reads at night. So the verb is a non-stative predicate. You can apply the other test to determine it. The sentence, the grammaticality of which suggests that read is activity or accomplish, is the applicability of the for an hour test. John read for an hour indicates that read is either an activity or an accomplished predicate. However, John took an hour to read is also grammatical. The predicate cannot be an activity predicate, leaving us with just one candidate aspectual class, accomplishments. That this predicate is an accomplishment is confirmed by the fact that if John reads for an hour, it does not entail that for all times in the hour John was reading. Furthermore, it can also occur as both the complement of stop and finish. In your unit, there is a specification of how we can do this, how we can algorithmically apply these tests and use a successive elimination of candidate categories in terms of a tableau. It is also important to note that the level at which these tests apply is not necessarily just a verb, and whole verb phrases need to be taken into account. For example, take two verb phrases in which the verb walk is used. John walked in the park and John walked to the park. Although both VPs are headed by the predicate walk, the two actually have to be classified differently. The former VP, that is, John walked in the park, denotes an activity. In John walked to the park, what we have is an accomplishment. Let us now examine whether we can do and create a featural specification for lexical aspect. We will use three feature values to describe each class: the property of being or not being static, durative, and telic. The value plus minus static relates to two options: whether the predicate obtains in time but does not take time, in which case is plus static, or whether it is continually subject to new inputs of energy, in which case it is minus static. The value plus minus durative relates to a choice as to whether the event is conceptualized as having duration or as being instantaneous. The value plus minus telic indicates whether the event has a change of state associated with it that marks the end of the event. An iterative event is not one that does not culminate, because after all, we live in time and most events do, but rather that it does not have a change of state as part of the event description. These three feature values combine into a feature geometry that determines the major 5 aspectual classes. States are plus static, plus durative, but minus telic. Activities are minus static, but plus durative and minus telic. Accomplishments are minus static, plus durative, plus telic. Achievements are minus static, minus durative, and plus telic. Seminal factors have none of these properties. Lexical aspect is marked on the Tibeto-Burman language Meiteilon on verbal roots. Oinam lists a number of such morphemes of Meiteilon, the most prominent of which are a group of directional morphemes: sin, which means in, which denotes the direction in; thok, which denotes the direction out; th, that denotes the direction down; and khat, which denotes the direction up. When this group of morphemes is used with motion verbs, these affixes indicate the motion in the direction specified. The verb climb up in Meiteilon involves the verb root ka, to which is added the morpheme khat. The verb climb down in Meiteilon involves the verb climb plus the morpheme down. The verb run into involves the root morpheme run plus sin. The verb run out involves the morpheme run plus out. Moynihan points out that these very affixes are also the ones used to derive change of state verbs, inchoative verbs from adjectives. So when in an adjectival predication like big, the root big is chow. When there is the shirt has become bigger, then you say chow thak, which is big plus out. If you have a description of a property like tall, and then you will have the predicate wang. To state that it has something has grown, it is one tall plus khat. In honorams analysis, what this group of morphemes do is do an event building process. When attached to states, whether pure adjectives or verbal participles, they signal an event of change between states. And when attached to motion verbs, they denote a goal-oriented event. In the terms that we have used in this lesson, these affixes can be licensed as morphemes that turn states and activities into achievement predicates. This can be confirmed by running the tests we have been using out through our chapter. Neither climb up the tree or grow up to 10 centimeters are statives. You can't say climb up for an hour or grow up for an hour. That means they fail that adverbial test. Climb up in an hour or grow up in an hour, both of these can be used. Climb up the tree, climb up as a complement of stop climbing up, and stop growing up can also be used. They can also not be used as the complements of finish. What these examples from Meiteilon and the analysis that we presented here emphasize is that what is one language's semantic features may end up being another language's morphosemantic or morphosyntactic features. English is a language in which the use of these adpositions particles give you different meanings of the verb root. Meiteilon's is of the second class. That is where morphology added to verb roots changes the aspectual class of the verb.